This month's Q&A focus comes from Susan, who asks, how do I achieve black whiskers on very dark fur? Today I'll show her and as well as you how to do that. If that's what you want to know about as well, then you're obviously in the right place. So let's get the brushes wet and let's get started. Whiskers can really bring that little bit of a wow factor to a painting because it can complete that portrait that you're working on. There's been times before when I forgot to put a whisker or two on. In fact, there's been times when I've forgotten to put any whiskers on and I couldn't quite put my finger on what was wrong with that painting, only to realise after a break I forgot to add those whiskers. Apart from the life and an eye of a subject, the whiskers can really make or break a painting. You can spend a long time getting all the details just right, but if the whiskers are not quite right and you've extended those whiskers onto a painted background, then it's very tricky to fix. So even though it may seem a simple subject, whiskers can be tricky to paint, but that's what I'm going to show you today on how to do that. Now the type of watercolour paper that you use can really make a difference. Let me show you what I mean. Now there are a variety of different surfaces of paper on the market, and each one performs differently when you're working with details, especially when you're painting whiskers. For example, we've got the smooth version, this old Bockingford by the way, which I tend to prefer to use. And the smooth version, hence its name, is extremely smooth to use. That's really good if you're working with pen and wash, such as botanical painting, so you can use it for that. I prefer that little bit more texture with the paper, so what I tend to use is the next one down. This one's got a medium texture, and I'll demonstrate on these very shortly for you. This one I tend to use on a regular basis. This is a cold pressed paper, so everyone's got a medium texture on this. It's not gone through hot rollers within the paper mill or anything like that. Whereas obviously the hot press paper has gone through hot rollers, hence the name. So this is very smooth, but yet it's still a bit of a texture, a bit of a bump to that paper surface. The third one I want to show you is this one here. This is a rough version, and this is really useful if you want to have a bit more of an expressive painting. So ideal for landscape painting, that sort of thing, but I find it's too textured for working with fine details. But still, it's a lovely paper to use. Now if you struggle painting whiskers, let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear about it. Now there are many different ways of dealing with dark whiskers, and here are just a few ways for you to try. Okay, let's bring some paint into the mix. Give this one a quick try, shall we, and see what we think. So this one is a smooth paper. Right, this is a size 2 brush. Tap off a little bit of paint to begin with. You can try it down the corner here. Don't want to waste the entire sheet, I know. But just give it a try and see what you think. And you can see how smooth this paper is when you're working on it. Look at that. It also depends on how well loaded you've got that brush. Let's try another one there. Look. Imagine this being a whisker. Now normally for whiskers I would use a finer brush than this one. So try my finer brush on the hot press paper. This is a size 00. Let's give that one a try. Okay. Oh, look at that. Straight away, very, very smooth. Very smooth indeed. Let's give that one a try again there so you can see it on the camera better. So imagine that being a whisker and how smooth that is on the paper. Let's try that again but on the cold pressed paper. Using the same consistency paint, probably to a milky consistency like that. We'll roll it. We'll give it a couple of taps, or 3, on some kitchen roll and try that. Here we go. Size 00 brush again, but this is a more textured paper. It's not the rough paper, but you can just see that starting to break up on that line there as I'm starting to run out of paint, and the texture is starting to show through. So when you're working on whiskers, you've got to make sure that the consistency of paint is definitely more of a milky consistency, or watery even. If it's too thick, the paint will just break up on the surface. So you can just see the texture coming through on this paper. And as I start to run out of paint, look at the way that's breaking up on the paper there, look. You find that the line is much smoother, look at that. Compared to, try and keep it fine, that one. That one's broken up in places, you can just about see it if you look really closely. Obviously the wider the line, the more obvious it is when it breaks up. Let's do a wider line. A few tiny breaks in there, but nowhere near as much as that one there. So that's a smooth surface compared to the cold pressed paper, which has got a bit of a texture to it, which I prefer to use. So the same consistency again. It's a milky consistency. So this is a rough paper. And so far, this rough paper isn't too bad. You will find the papers vary from manufacturer to manufacturer. I found that when I'm working with the arch paper, is that can be a little more textured compared to cold pressed paper. But this is a rougher surface. It's not that much difference in my eyes to the standard cold pressed paper. But when you look carefully at the texture of the paper, you can just see it's a little bit more kind of textured compared to the cold pressed. Nothing like the hot pressed. No. So to recap, we've got the hot pressed paper, which is really smooth, ideal for botanical work. We've got the cold pressed paper, which I know is also the same as the arch one down below. That's also fairly smooth, but it's got a bit of texture to it. And then you've got the rough paper, which is a little bit rougher than the cold pressed. It's as simple as that. But just remember, as I mentioned earlier on, is that they do all vary from manufacturer to manufacturer. So what do you need to be able to paint whiskers? Okay, what's the essential tools for that? What I would recommend is a fine detail brush like this one here, size 00, okay, or a size 2, anything with a decent point on it like these two here. Lot. So size 2 is a little bit bigger, so it's got a bigger body on there, which means it can hold more water. Just saves on to keep reloading it all the time. So they're the two main brushes that I would use for whiskers. You can, however, use something like a dip pen, not something I would normally use for whiskers, but you can use it. I've used that actually with masking fluid to create whiskers as well. Let me show you that. So if I get a little bit of masking fluid and load up that dip pen, like that, give it a tap or two, then use that to create some very fine marks, which can be used as whiskers. So if I just put a few odd ones on here, you've got to be careful with something like this because it can mark that surface of the paper. So you can imagine, if I try and do a longer whisker, like that, then the one below it. It does work really well when you can get it going in the first place. But it does take a little while to kind of get the pen working, to get that whisker that you want. I mean, it's working now, but initially it didn't work. So it can be a little bit temperamental. Another way you can do this is by using a ruling pen. So it's one of these here where you can adjust the wheel on the front part, like that, so you can get wider or even finer, and then you can load that up with the masking fluid like that lot and apply that to the paper, but you find the lines are quite wide. So I'll try that one. So we can get it going. Oh, there we go. See how wide those lines are? So you can narrow down that gap a little bit more by squeezing that wheel in just a touch. That will make it a little bit finer, but not by much. One more way you can apply masking fluid for whiskers is by using a very old brush, and these are destined for the bin. What you can do is get a damp bar soap like this and just wipe it through there first of all, just using a damp brush. And that will help preserve those bristles a little bit longer. I tend to save all my old brushes when they get a bit worn, and I save them for reasons like this. And that gives you a much finer line, barely noticeable on the camera, I know. You can hardly see it, but it's there. But that's another way you can add masking fluid for whiskers by using an old size 00 brush, an old fine detail brush like that one. Okay, let's add some colour over the top. Anything will do, don't really matter, does it? Just give this a try. A bit of browny, reddy colour, anything will do. We'll try that one there, a bit darker. Goes over there. Let's go for much darker colour. Cover it over, let it dry. A little tip from me to you as well, when you're working masking fluid, try not to dry it with a hairdryer because it can harden it sometimes, which then makes the masking fluid very difficult to remove. Look at that coming through. Oh, you can do the same using wax as well, like a wax resist idea. So imagine these being whiskers on a cat, a dog, or some animal in general. Doesn't really matter, does it? We'll let that dry and then see what the effect is like when we remove that masking fluid. Well, it's nice and bone dry. So because of that, we can now remove that masking fluid. Here we go, you ready? Oh, dry fingers first, by the way. Clean, non-greasy, non-oily, dry fingers. Although those two fingers there will do. And start to remove the masking fluid for these, well, makeshift kind of whiskers really, aren't they? And you can see straight away the effect that you get I'm using masking fluid to do that with. Push it onto the carpet. Don't tell anybody, okay? Keep it quiet. Shh, don't tell anybody. It can be quite uneven in places, as you can see. So don't vein the edges in some cases. Another way you can do this is by using the scratching off technique. So I've got myself one of these craft knives, okay, with snappable blades. And you can do it this way. Make sure it's nice and dry, the paint though, first of all. And they can scratch off whiskers. You can see it's very tricky. Look how it's just torn the paper there. Scratch them off bit by bit. So you can create whiskers this way around. Well, that's better. Look up there, so it's drier. Just another way you can do that, but it's all broken up on the paper. It's not my preferred method, I have to admit, but I know it's one method that some people do tend to use. Another way to create whiskers is by using indenting tools, like these here, look. So the idea is, I'll get the smallest one, which is probably that one there, I think. The idea is that you indent the paper, like this. You have to press on quite hard, you know, when you're doing this. Just create a few little lines here and there. And hopefully the effect will be dark whiskers compared to the surrounding area. And using my mixing brush, it'll do. Apply that over the paper, like that. And straight away, you can see the lines where the whiskers are, can't you? Or these little kind of indented areas. And basically what's happening is that the paint is soaking in to those indented areas. So the little tiny thin valleys here and there. It's not that distinct, is it? But it's a way you can do whiskers that way as well. And also another way to create texture on the paper. Especially if you're working with foliage. Yeah. This is another way that you can paint whiskers by using the negative technique. Okay, so negative painting. All I've just done there, look. Just did a quick try out first of all before telling you. Create a bit of a shape like that. Think about how long you want the whisker to be. Another shape above it. Keep it wide to begin with. Like that. Then start nipping into that line so get it nice and tight. Really tight like so. A little bit tighter. Come on, be daring. You can do it. Nice and fine. Whiskers are fine, aren't they? And then start to work around that area now. Fill it in outside. Now if you're going to be painting more than one whisker, and you want another whisker down here, you'll have to plan this out first of all in your mind, how you're going to do that. So if I want another whisker probably here, around there maybe, I don't know, because that could have probably overlapped that one if I thought about it in advance, but it didn't. And then you can create another whisker just there, just make an appearance and so on and so on. And start building up those whiskers as you go along. So another one around there, nice and fine, just like that. Don't know why I'm talking like that for. Then fill in the gaps. And obviously if you plan it beforehand in your head, you can have these whiskers overlapping as well. There's another way of painting whiskers by using the negative painting technique. Now sometimes when people paint whiskers, they can paint them far too wide and also not smooth enough either. For example, if I get my size 00 brush, as mentioned that's my preferred size when I'm painting whiskers, give it a tap or two. What I need to do, well it's a bit wet down there, what I need to do is paint it nice and fine, so something like this here. So really fine like that. That's a broken whisker. It's really fine. Like so, you're barely touching the paper. Go a little bit too heavy with the brush, I'll show you what I mean, look. And paint a whisker like this. Just pressing on far too hard, then bit of a jiggle, bit of a wiggle, and not plan it beforehand. In fact, I'm going to show you next the way that I tend to paint fine whiskers. Now, if you've got a story when you've been painting whiskers on one of your portraits, let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear about it. Now here's a video clip from one of my Patreon video lessons where I show my members how to paint whiskers by considering the curvature and the length and the thickness of those lines. And if you get these right, these can really add more of a dynamic realism to your paintings. By talking about ghosts. Pardon? So you're going to load it, you're going to roll it, then you're going to give it a tap again on some kitchen roll, like that. Alright, just take a little bit off. And then ghost it first. Now I was talking about ghosting earlier on, and all it simply is by using your hand and sort of setting a memory in your hand in a way. Not that your hand's got a brain, of course. I've barely got a brain, but you know what I mean. And this sort of kind of helps you work out the angle that you want to go at before touching the paper. So say for example, just load that again. I want to do a line in that direction. I'll do it away from the paper first, okay, to get an idea how I want it. And then what I'll do, see what I'm doing? And then bring the brush down and then do that movement, but barely touching the paper. So I'll do it again, like that. And then bring the brush down, just touching the paper and lift off. See that? So again, brush down, touching the paper and lift off. It's got a nice tapered edge to that line. So that's what we'll be doing, working on the whiskers. We've got to look at the kind of shapes that they are. They all vary, don't they, in length and shape and also colour as well. Some of them you want to weaken this down a little bit more, some you want to darken it. Don't do them all deep black or anything like that, okay? So just be careful not to do them like that. Now here's a small video on how I created a very fine whiskers by thinking about the direction and the curvature of each individual whisker as we work on them. I want it more of a milky consistency, so very milky. Okay, load it, roll it, pull it away, give it a couple of taps on some kitchen roll, and let's give it a go, shall we? Now I'm looking at the first ones we can see are just above the eye. And just test it first of all, make sure it's not too thick. It's always worth testing before you go for it. Think about the gentle curve that you've got. The kind of normal curve in your hand, which is why I've got my paper turned around this way. If you're right-handed, you might be able to do it with the paper just normal on landscape kind of mode. But if I look at this now, I'm just going to very lightly. So you can see how fine that line is. That's because I've not overloaded the brush and I've not gone straight onto the paper with that brush after loading it. So I'm going to load it again. I've tapped it a couple of times. I'm going to test it again to make sure it's not too thick. And then I'm going to add another one just there. Only a small one. And probably there. There you go. It's going to pop into my... Let's go into our dark colour a minute. Just so we can thin it down on the sides. I'm going to add a dart there and a dart there. Look how that makes a difference just by doing that, look. But sticking with the black, our blacky red colour, make sure that this is more of a milky consistency again, not creamy, not really thick. You want it to spread, you want it to flow really. So load your brush up, give it a roll, give it a tap, so there's only the very tip we want to use on that. Start off by working with the smaller ones down below first of all. Okay, a little bit more there. Just by adding these in, very small, before we go for the more confident strokes of these kind of higher hairs there. And you can also add just a touch of light to some of the whiskers to give them more of a three-dimensional feel. About there, I think. Okay, my white's drying up quite quickly here, so I need to add a little bit more water. And where this one goes, it's going to change colour from that black to the white. That's it. If you find it goes too thick, that's not too bad actually, that one, but if it does go too thick, you can obviously tone it down afterwards. Once it's dry, come back in with your dark colour and just touching these edges just to kind of fade it back down that little bit. So you can do that if need be, okay? So you can sort it out. So if your lines end up being too thick, don't worry. It's repairable. We can fix them. We can fix things here, you know, we have ways and means. Alright, so I think we're about there. Final touches and next steps. Now usually when you're working on a fine detailed painting and you're trying to paint fine whiskers, etc., you don't always see it as a whole because you're focused on all them details, aren't you? So a little tip from me to you today is to make sure that you stand back away from that painting and view it from a distance. And also take a break. Go and make yourself a nice hot drink, then come back with those fresh eyes, and very often you find something that you think, that's not quite right, you know. Oh, I know what it is. I forgot to add the whiskers. Now mentioning whiskers, how about learning how to paint a cat in watercolours, which obviously involves painting whiskers. I'll pop that video to the top right hand corner of the screen for you. I'll see you there.